Visual Studio isn't the only C# editor that Microsoft makes. Visual Studio Code is a cross-platform development environment that can be used for development with most languages, including C#. In this video, we're going to be looking at what VS Code is, how to install it, and how to use it to develop C# applications. The best part is that what you learn in this video will work on Windows, Mac, or Linux. The source code for today's video is available to download using the link in the description. You'll also find links there to sign up for my mailing list and for my Patreon. As you watch this video, please post your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I'll do my best to respond to you. Now, if you haven't come across me before, my name is Tim Corey, and my goal is to make learning C# easier. One of the ways I do that is by teaching context. There's a lot of tutorials out there that teach you what to do. I go a few steps beyond that to show you when to do it, why you should or shouldn't do it, what pitfalls to avoid, and what the best practices are. Basically, I get you ready for the real world. If that's the type of training you're interested in, subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Okay, let's get started. Since we're learning about Visual Studio Code or VS Code, I decided to go and uninstall everything I have on my machine and start over so you can see every step along the process. So the very first step is to go to visualstudio.com, which actually redirects you to visualstudio.microsoft.com. Either way, this is where we normally get our Visual Studio IDE, but we can also get Visual Studio Code. This is the one we're going to talk about today. And yes, these two IDEs are different. This is not a light version of Visual Studio. It's a different thing. It's a different editor. This is actually one of the most popular editors on the planet, and it's completely free. There is no paid version of Visual Studio Code. So you can click the Download for Windows button, or you can click Learn More to learn more about VS Code, and then get a version. Notice that we have versions for Mac, for Windows, and for Linux. You could get the insider version if you want the latest and greatest stuff, but I'm going to stick with the stable version today, which I've already downloaded. So now that I've downloaded it, I'm going to start installing it. I'm going to do that on screen. So let's do this. Let's close out our browser, and I'm going to accept the agreement. This is a really simple install, but I did want to show you all the different steps. Where it's going to install is fine. It's going to create a folder for me. That's fine. I'm not going to do a desktop icon, but these other ones are kind of nice. First of all, open with Code Action from Windows Explorer, and that's the File Context menu and the Directory Context menu. That means when you right-click on a directory, you can say Open this directory in Code. If you right-click on a file, you can say Open this file in Code. And then you can register Code as an editor for supported file types. I'm not going to do that. I do use Visual Studio as my primary development platform, and I do use some other IDEs, and I don't want to step on their toes. But if this is going to be your primary IDE, and if you're going to be using it for things, especially like HTML files, CSS, you may want to make this your editor of choice. And if so, you can register Code as the editor for those supported file types. For me, I'll leave it off. And this is just an editor. It's not the editor, but it provides it as an option. So it really is not going to hurt to check that box. I'm going to leave it alone though. And finally, add to the path, which does require a restart, but it's already on my path, so I think it should be fine. But definitely check that box. And then, now this is a Windows install, so maybe a little bit different for Mac or Linux because there's different settings. But for the most part, what this is going to do is just install it. And if you just hit next, 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 install, it'd probably work just fine. I just wanted to add those two checkboxes. We hit install. It's a pretty quick install. It's only about 230 megabytes of total storage on Windows. And now I'll hit Launch Visual Studio Code. And there we go. So this is the welcome screen. This is, notice I do have some recent stuff in here because I have used it before. It retains your settings. even if you uninstall the application. So there are ways to clear those out if you really wanted to, but if you reinstall Visual Studio Code, you won't lose your settings or your extensions. So let's close out the welcome message. And speaking of extensions, let's go and look at the extensions. So on the left here, we have 5 icons. We have the Explorer, which is the one that's selected already. We have this search, which you can search for things. We have source control, which is nothing registered right now. We have the debug window. We'll use this in a little bit. And finally, we have extensions. And extensions is where you install and basically set up your VS Code installation for how you're going to use it. Because VS Code it's a wide open editor. It's not just for one thing. And while Visual Studio, not VS Code, but Visual Studio, while it is focused on C# and F# and VB.NET, it can do other things. This platform, VS Code, says, you know what? I'm going to do whatever you want me to do. And so, for example, Popular is a Python language pack. And notice, and I think this is really cool, the author is Microsoft. So Python's a pretty popular programming language. If you want to develop in Python, you can do it in VS Code or C or C++. If you want to do, there's a number of different options here. There's our C# right there, Java, Go. There's just a lot of different options in here you can do. Angular snippets, TypeScript, all these things can be developed inside of VS Code. Now for us, we're going to be focused on C# development. And that's why I really was careful in how I titled this and introduced this. This video is going to focus on using VS Code, but for C#. So we're not going to learn about how to do Vue or Angular or even HTML and CSS too much. We're going to focus in on C#. And that starts with our extensions. So the first extension you want as a C# developer is this C# extension right here. It's from Microsoft. It's powered by OmniSharp. So this is a tool for helping us work with C# projects. So install that, and that's all it is. So this is installed now. We also want a couple more things. Git Lens, we're not going to use Git in this video, but I do recommend you at least check it out. This is a really powerful tool that's from a person, it's not from Microsoft, but it does some really powerful things in here. You can go down and look at the different options it offers. And the documentation is really great as to what it can do. But the next one we want to install is VS Code-icons. This allows us to apply some icons to our files. Notice the different icons here. It's a nice little thing that can make a big difference as to how it looks. So I'm going to install that. And sometimes we may install things we're not going to use necessarily, but we're going to use the VS icons. It says thank you. Go ahead and activate. Sounds good. So now it's installed. Like I was saying before, we may not necessarily use something heavily, but I want to show you some of the basic things to install to get you up and going and give you some early recommendations on how to use different pieces. Because unlike Visual Studio, which comes with everything kind of pre-built in, this is a plug-and-play architecture. You have to know what you want. One that I'll not install, but I want to point out, is this Azure repos. So if you're dealing with the Azure DevOps, where you have your source code and Git in Azure DevOps, this makes it really easy to work with Azure DevOps and connect to your code and version control. So that's an option as well. Again, we're not going to install that. I'm not going to hook it up to a version control today. But I do want to look for IntelliCode. Okay, so Visual Studio IntelliCode. This is what's built into Visual Studio, and now we have it for VS Code as well. Notice down here in this little GIF, notice how it's selecting things that are starred. These are things that are the most common options when you type something out. And so it's kind of guessing for you, this is probably what you're looking for. And it just makes the IntelliSense a little easier to navigate. So we're going to go ahead and install that. The next one we're going to install is, let's just type NuGet and type search. The first one here is the NuGet Package Manager. Again, this is not from Microsoft. This is just a way to make NuGet packages a little easier to find and install. So we're going to install this. It's not necessary, and really most of these aren't necessary, but this is just a shortcut to make life a little easier. The final extension we're going to install, we're not going to use, but I wanted to show you and install it because I want to really focus in on this and say, yes, you want this if you work with anybody else, and that is Live Share from Microsoft. This allows you to share your screen between Visual Studio codes or even to Visual Studio itself. So you can say, hey, can you check this out? And someone else can watch what you're doing without having to share your whole screen. It just shares the code essentially. So it's a pretty cool tool that if you're working with somebody, especially remotely, this is a great way of working with them. All right, so those are all the extensions I'm going to install. All right, and there's the welcome for that. So now we have that installed. I actually added a new tab over here, button over here. But now we have VS Code configured with all the extensions we want. Let's just review that real quick. So let's clear out our extensions. We have popular, we have recommended. Let's go to show installed extensions. And there we go. So there are the installed extensions. We have C#, we have Live Share, we have the NuGet Package Manager, we have Visual Studio IntelliCode, and we have Visual Studio or VS Code icons. Those are the packages that we've installed, or the extensions. So now we're going to transition a little bit and talk through how to get started using C# inside VS Code. Because this is a little bit different than Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, you go File, New Project, and start working on it, kind of the dialogue, and you have templates and all the rest. In VS Code, it's not quite that way. Instead, we rely a lot more on the command line, which may seem a little bit intimidating at first, but there's some real benefits to it, and it is pretty quick to pick up. Now, I'm going to share with you a resource. I'm going to bring up here. They have documented the .NET Core command line interface tools really well. So we're going to be using a lot of these commands today. And I think you'll see that once you get started, it's not that hard to do. And this really does help you, this guide. So for example, if I want to do .NET New, then here are all the commands you could run. There's options. And then here's how to, right down, well, way down here, sorry. There we go. So there's how to actually do it. So, and they'll show you exactly step by step how to do this. So I'm going to walk through the basic ones you need to know, but just know we're using command line for this. And yeah, that can be a little bit intimidating at first. But again, I'll show you how to do it. Now, the nice thing is built into Visual Studio Code or VS Code is a terminal right down here at the bottom. Now, if it's not showing, so it's not showing like that, and it's kind of missing, then what you can do is on Windows, it's the control and then the tick mark, which is usually to the left of the 1 key, and that brings up the terminal. So there's also menus up here, so you can look at the different options here. The biggest option in Visual Studio Code is this command palette. The command palette allows you to do a ton of different things and even prompts you. Notice I'm going to start scrolling down here. There's a lot of options in here you can look at. Don't get overwhelmed. I'd focus in on the ones that you want. The nice thing is, if you're not sure what you're doing, let's just say you're looking for something. Let's pick one out of the list. Maybe you're looking for file icon theme, but you're way up here. You have no clue. Just say icon theme, and there you go. Preferences, file icon theme. Oh, that's what it is, and you click on it. Okay, and then it will take you to the different options. So that right there, that command palette is really helpful. And Windows, it's Control-Shift-P to show it, or you can go to the View menu. So I lost a different. So the View menu. But the terminal is built right in. So we could, in the terminal, do everything we need to, or what we can do is I can dump out to Windows Explorer, and then I can run from here. It's really up to you. There is no real difference. Okay, I'm going to do it here. So in my Explorer bars, in the right folder, I'm going to type CMD, hit enter, and that pops up a new console window in the correct folder. So if you're not familiar with that shortcut, that can save you a lot of time. Just type CMD up here, and then it will take you to whatever folder you're in directly. Now let's close out of Visual Studio Code, just so it's closed, and I will maximize this. So now we have our console open. We're going to do a few commands in here, and then we'll open VS Code back up. So the first command I want to do is I want to build or create a solution. Now, a lot of times in examples, you will see people just building a project right away. So say .NET new console. The problem with that is it doesn't create a solution for you. And if you are a Visual Studio developer, you are familiar with the idea that when we build a project, we also get a solution for free. And that's just common. And so the idea of having a project without a solution is a little disconcerting. Now remember that solutions just hold things together. That's all they really do. They don't do any work on any of the projects. So it's not a big deal not to have a solution, but I'm going to want a solution in order to mimic what we have in Visual Studio. So let's start with a solution. So .NET, D-O-T-N-E-T, and this is the starter command for everything we do with .NET. So .NET new SLN for solution. I'm going to give it a name, so -n, and then put in quotes. I'm going to say VS Code intro solution. Like so. I hit enter, and the solution file was created successfully. So I do a dir, you'll see that we now have VS Code intro sln.sln. And that's all we have in this directory. So now I can say .NET new console. Now how I know to say console, that's from that documentation. I'll put that documentation link right in the source code in a comment so that you can have it for later. But this is a project template. It's going to create a .NET Core console application for us. So I'm going to say the name is going to be Intro UI. Sounds about right. And that's creating or scaffolding our project for us. Notice it's going to be in the folder Intro UI and then intro UI.csproj. So now if we do a dir again, we now have a directory for intro UI. So now I'm going to do one more time, .NET new class library, or class lib -n, and this is going to be intro library. So a class lib, which is a class library, -n for the name of it, and the name is going to be intro library. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but right away, this is really quick. This just creates these projects, boom, boom, boom. There's no dialog boxes, no searching for the right one. It's just done for us. So now that class library has been created. And if I look at my directory, I now see intro library. Now, one thing we don't have right now is this VSCode intro solution.sln file. It doesn't know about this project or this project. We haven't put these projects into the solution file. So I'm going to do that right now. Now, if you're on a bash command prompt, this is not a bash command prompt, this is a Windows command prompt. But if you're on a bash command prompt, which you can get on Windows, then you can use what's called globbing, which allows you to add things using ***/ kind of thing. And I'll show you that pattern in just a minute. But if you're on Windows and don't have access to a bash, then what you need to do is say .NET SLN, not new, .NET SLN, and then give your solution name. So VS Code intro sln.sln, add, and then you give your project name. So our project name is going to be, it's in the intro UI / intro UI.cs proj. That's how we'd add it. So that's going to be a one at a time method where you add the first one and then you add the second one. Now I do have a bash installed. In fact, it comes with git. So this is my git bash. And so what I'm going to do is say, this is the right directory. Notice it looks different because this is bash. This is not the command prompt. So I'm going to say, let's do a dir first. We have our intro library, we have our intro UI, and we have our solution file. So I'm going to say .NET SLN, and the name is VS Code intro sln.sln. And then I'm going to say add, and instead of specifying this is the project folder and then the project name, I'm going to say any folder I want to have any CS proj added. So any folder below where we're at, which would mean intro UI and an intro library. If inside there's a CS proj file, add that to this solution. That's that globbing pattern. This does not work in Windows command prompt, but it does in bash. So if I hit enter, notice it's added two things to the solution: intro library and intro UI. Okay, so that's the one thing that bash does even better than the command prompt. We don't have to do that per file. So far, I have created my solution. I've created a console UI. I've created a class library. And then I have put both the console UI and the class library into the solution file, associated them. The last thing I want to do right now is I want to say that the UI references the library. So that way we have a project reference to this class library from the user interface. So to do that, I would say .NET add. And then I give it the project I want to own the reference, meaning my user interface. So intro UI / intro UI.cs proj, reference, and then the library to reference. So intro library / intro library.cs proj. Okay, so it's going to add a reference. There we go. That's all it did. Okay. Now I can start working with this complete solution. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say that I want to start working with the user interface. So I'm going to drop into the intro UI folder. So now I'm in the intro UI folder. So you change directory, cd space intro UI. And now let's do a clear screen and do a directory. Notice we have our program.cs, our CS proj file, and obj folder. At the command prompt, inside of your project folder, not your solution folder, your project folder, at the command prompt, you can say code space dot. And what that does is it's going to launch Visual Studio Code at this location with this folder. If I hit go, there we go. So now it's launched Visual Studio Code for my project in the correct location. Now wait for it in just a minute, and it's going to pop up and say required assets to build and debug are missing from intro UI. Do you want to add them? I absolutely do, yes. What this does is it adds a couple of files, launch.json and tasks.json. And this sets up how we're going to debug inside of VS Code. So this is a shortcut. It makes it really easy to work with. Now, I'm going to actually close Visual Studio Code right now because I want to go one level higher. But I wanted to launch it at this project level in order to create those two files. I close back out. I'm going to change the directory to up1, so cd space dot dot. And now code space dot. And it's going to launch Visual Studio Code again, this time at the solution level. So that little tweak allowed me to create those files. Now it's going to say, hey, it's actually going to try for this as well. Let's say yes for creating the files at this level. Sometimes I found it doesn't add these files. It may be because the solution file was blank when I did it. I hadn't associated yet. So you may not have to do that project level open if you have your solution associated with your two projects. So just something to think about is it might not have to be done, but that's how you would do it to create these files for you. You can do these manually. I just find it a pain to do manually. What it's doing is it's saying, hey, the workspace here, we've got the intro UI /bin /debug /netcore app 3.0 /intro UI.dll. That's the program to run to debug this application. And the font's a little bigger now. Sorry about that. So this focuses on, this is the DLL that's going to run. And it's saying, okay, this is what you're going to launch when you're debugging. So we'll see that in just a minute. But now we can browse through our files. Notice we have these nice little icons now that better represent what these different files are. So the C#, it's a little hard to see, but it does show us a C# as the file icon. And this looks just like Visual Studio as far as the code itself goes. It's got nice IntelliSense here. It's got nice coloring here. It's even got the refactoring for us. So for example, I can say CW, and once IntelliSense comes up, I can hit tab, and now I can say this is a test. Notice I got my CW tab, only it's now CW tab instead. It does add system in front of this, so system.console.writeline, and it does give us the red squigglies. You don't have to have system dot because we got the using statement up here. It's up to you. Now, the first thing you do usually with the class library is you delete class 1. We can do that. So let's delete class 1. It says, are you sure? Yep, I want to do that. And now you say, well, I want to create a new class file. Let's just call it create a person class, let's say. New file. And it says, okay, sure, just create a file. And I go, sure, person model.cs. That's it. So you got a blank file. Now, there are some templates you can use, item templates, And you can even create your own item templates if you want. But by default, files are just blank files. They don't give you anything. So I have to say using system, notice the IntelliSense here. And then I don't create it very often. Namespace is intro UI. So namespace is intro UI. Actually intro library, since we're inside of the library itself. And then we'll put our curly braces and say public class. And this is person model. And it wants to put my curly brace in the same line. That's not how I do it in C#. It is how we do it in JavaScript. So that's probably why it's defaulting that way. But it has no problem with putting it on its own line. I can say prop and say string. Whoops. The one thing I found is if you go too fast with it, that it doesn't work the way you expect it to. So first name, if I hit shift tab, I can go back to string. But once I hit tab and tab again, it's going to go to the end of the line and be done. Now I can't shift tab back to where I was. So that's the one thing that's a little bit different too, is that instead of tabbing back and forth through the snippets, it tabs through each spot. You can shift tab back to previous spots, but it will not roll around to the start again if you tab beyond the last point. It just sends you to the end of the line. So your keystrokes, if you're familiar with Visual Studio, will be a little bit different, and that can be a little bit jarring at first. You just need to learn the differences. String, and then this is last name. And enter here will not work. Notice it does this. That's not what you want. You want tab. So again, a little bit different. So I'll do just age. So there's my 3 properties for my person model. It is not saved until you hit Control S. Notice that up here, it's kind of hard to see. Let's actually zoom in here. So there we go. So right now there's an X here because I saved it already. But notice program.cs has this, I can't put my mouse over it, but it's got a round circle that indicates that it has been changed but not yet saved. So if I were to come over here and I were to say Control S, that saves the file and now it's just an X. Okay. It will also prompt you if you were to try and close the file. It would say, let's just do one more CW, the end. Like so. If I were to close this, it prompts you and says, do you want to save this? Yes, I do. Also note that there is an open editors up here where you have all the files that are currently open. So if I open another file, both of them are up here. I can also close them from this location. Okay, so let's start working with our Visual Studio code, or our code for C#. So the first thing we want to do is, how are we going to run this? Well, there is an option. If we open a terminal, so Control tick, I could just say in this folder .NET run, and it will. There's no thing to run here. But if I were to say .NET run, and then say intro UI, I believe. Well, we can CD to it. Intro UI, and then .NET run. There we go. And notice it runs right in this console. So you have our hello world. Sorry, I'll zoom in here. We have our hello world. We have this as a test and the end. Not ideal though, because that's not where we really want it. And while the command line is pretty powerful, I don't want to play around with it. And also, if we put a breakpoint here, it won't actually hit the breakpoint. Now, trust me, it won't. But there's another option. Now that, remember at the beginning it said, hey, we don't have a profile set up. Do you want to create one? And I said yes. And it created the launch JSON and tasks JSON. Well, now that I have a breakpoint here, if I hit F5, it will actually launch this application. So F5, it's launching the application, and the terminal is still down here. So the terminal is down here. But if you notice, here's a breakpoint, and it's sitting right here on the console write line. Now, there's not a lot of variables to look at. It's just a string args. But if I have this menu up here of our normal settings, we have continue, which is F5. We have step over, F10. Step into is F11. And step out is shift F11. We also have restart and stop. So if I were to say run, it runs it down here in the debug console. We notice hello world, this is a test, and the end. So this allows us to debug our C# application like we normally do. Also notice it actually changed windows on me. So I was up here, but it switched me down to the debug section. And you have variables, watch window, call stacks. And down here at the bottom, we have breakpoints, which actually shows us where the breakpoints are. So I close this out and click on program.cs. It shows you right where that breakpoint is, which is on line 9. So you can actually manage all your breakpoints here. You can also choose to break on all exceptions or just user unhandled exceptions. So it's got all the features. They're just in a little bit different place than in Visual Studio. So let's create some data so we can see how this all works. So I want to create a new person model, which it's not here yet. So I control dot to add a using statement for using intro library, just like in Visual Studio. So person model, and let's call it P equals new person model. And let's actually populate it right away. So I'm going to say first name, again, IntelliSense, first name equals Tim and last name equals Corey. And let's put my semicolon at the end. So now we have a person model object. And now what we can do is we can say, let's do a console write line, and we'll do our $sign for string interpolation. We're going to say p.firstname space p.lastname is my name. Now notice it color codes the whole thing as if it's a string. But we did get IntelliSense inside of these curly braces. So again, it's a little bit different than what you'd see in Visual Studio, but the end result is the same. If I come down here and hit Control J, oops, not Control J, that is Visual Studio. For VS Code, it's Control Space. So Control Space will bring up IntelliSense for me and say, oh, that's what you're looking for. So if I had just like this, I can Control Space, and now I have IntelliSense. I can make my choice from this list and just click it. So with that, let's put our breakpoint here. Let's hit F5 to run this. And we're going to look at the variables now that they're here. Notice I'll zoom in here. In the upper left-hand corner, we have P, which is a intro library.person model. And inside here, we have age is set to 0. The first name is Tim and last name is Corey. And notice it even gives us the types for those. So we have all of that data in our variables window. And just as before, if I hit go, it says down here at the bottom, Tim Corey is my name, hello world, this is a test, and the end. So that's basically it. Now, there's one area that we haven't covered you may not have caught yet, but it's kind of a big deal. And that is, what about NuGet? If you want to add a NuGet package to your application, what do? Well, there's a couple ways of doing this. Let's do this. Let's start off with, I'm going to clear this console. I could do it from here. So I could say, let's go to CD and change to the intro library. And inside here, let's Let's zoom in here because it's awful tiny. So inside the intro library, I can say .NET add package and then give the package name. So you can go to NuGet.org and search for the packages, find the package you want, and say just as simple as .NET add package Dapper. Now this will install the latest version, the latest non-preview version of Dapper into the intro library package. I hit enter and it's going to start going, and there we go. So now it is complete. And if we go to Dapper and look at the CS_proj file, notice that package reference includes Dapper. The other thing you could do is you can copy this, go over to your other CS_proj file, which actually this one, it's an item group. So let's grab the whole thing. Now we have an item group over here. We do not. Oh, we do. Look at that. We'll add another one. So item group for Dapper. That would also work. But now it says, hey, there are unresolved dependencies. Please execute the restore command to continue. Or just click the restore button. Now, the other thing I do is say .NET restore, I believe, is the command. But just click the button, and it will restore Dapper for my intro UI front end. So now I have Dapper there as well. So if you know the command, the name and the version, then you could create this, or you could even copy and paste it from somewhere else, and it would work just fine. That's another way of doing it. A third way of doing it would be if you bring up that command palette, that Control-Shift-P, or under the View menu command palette, you can type NuGet and hit enter, and then you can search for your package name. So if I would search for Serolog and hit enter, there's all the different Serolog's NuGet packages. I can click Serolog, and then it says, which version do you want? Well, these are all marked as dev versions. I'm thinking I want 2.8. Click on that, and which project do you want to put it into? I'm going to put it into my class library. I click that, and it says, hey, there's dependencies to resolve. Go ahead and resolve them. And now if I come over here to my intro library.csproj, now notice I have Serolog installed in that project. So that last way used that extension I was talking about earlier. So you have extensions here. That is the NuGet Package Manager extension. It's a fairly popular extension, and it makes life a little easier because you can just search for whatever package you're looking for and then just click on it. So again, that's a little easier. The nice thing also is that it asks you, which project do you want this in? That allows you to not have to make sure you're in the right directory in order to add a NuGet package. So that's really all there is to the big differences, the big hurdles with working with C# in VS Code. Is it as good as Visual Studio? No, absolutely not. Visual Studio has a really impressive story around building C# applications. It just makes things easy. But there are cases where you might not be able to use a full Visual Studio. One might be maybe your company just won't pay for it. Maybe you're a large enough company that you have to pay for Visual Studio. You can't use the Visual Studio Community Edition, which is free. And so you're saying, well, what do I do? Well, you can install VS Code. Not only that, you don't have to have admin rights in order to install Visual Studio Code, which means you could even install it on a machine where you're not allowed to install programs. That's a possibility. So now please hear me. I'm not telling you to violate company policies, but this does allow you to not have to make permanent changes to your laptop or desktop in order to install a new application. So it's a possibility there as well. The other case is if you have a Mac or a Linux machine, you can still run VS Code. You can still build and run C# projects. The one thing to note is that you can run and build a WinForm application or a WPF application inside of VS Code on Windows only. Because WinForms and WPF only work on Windows. So you could make some modifications to the project file, but you can't debug or run it if you're on Mac or Linux. There also won't be any drag and drop designer or visual designer for your Forms project, either WinForms or WPF. So again, if you're on Windows, if you have the opportunity, use Visual Studio, the full Visual Studio. But otherwise, Visual Studio Code will do the job for you. Okay? Now, I did promise you that I was going to give you that link. Let me put that inside of program.cs. I'm going to put it right up here. For documentation, go here. So this is the documentation for all of the command line stuff for .NET Core, they say, but really it's for .NET. So we're getting to the point where .NET Framework, you don't create or new projects in .NET Framework. So we're moving towards .NET Core, and so that's why it's focused on .NET Core. It also says .NET Core 2.x or 2.x, even though 3.0 comes out and actually it's probably out by now, and that's okay, because if you have the option in the documentation to go to 3, then do so. But even with 2, the commands are pretty much the same. It's just there'll be new commands or added commands for 3. Now, as you can imagine, this is not a comprehensive everything you can do with Visual Studio Code. There's a lot more you can do and a lot more features to really explore and think through and talk through. So my encouragement to you is try it out. Even if you have Visual Studio, try out VS Code, play around with it. It will give you a better understanding of how .NET code works, how it's built, because Visual Studio makes these calls behind the scenes for us. This way you can actually see what those commands are. It'll also give you some ideas of other things you could do with VS Code. VS Code is an amazing editor for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a bunch more. It's actually one of the most popular editors on the planet, and it's completely free and open source. Now in the future, I'll be doing a Visual Studio Code tips and tricks video. So I would love it if you leave in the comments below your favorite tips and tricks about VS Code. If you used it before, or if you just started and you picked something up, or you saw something in a presentation once, I'd love for you to let me know what your favorites are. Things like, from any command prompt or saying code space dot launches VS Code in that folder. That's really cool. So what are the other things that you really like, and the shortcuts or other things that just make VS Code so much more powerful? Also extensions. What extensions do you use that maybe I didn't touch on, that maybe you think I should mention? I do try and limit somewhat what extensions I show off, because I do want you to get the experience of using it at its kind of bare metal, or the without things that might go away tomorrow or might be different tomorrow. So I try and limit that a little bit, but at the same time, I want to provide you this list of resources where, hey, you can make your life even better if you get these different extensions. So let me know what extensions you like as well, okay? So that's how to get started. Don't forget to download the source code. It's got that link in there for you as well. And let me know what you think about Visual Studio Code and what tips, tricks, and extensions you like. Okay? Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.